There's a shift happening in Asia right now that most of the world is ignoring a transformation so dramatic that it could reshape global power for the next century. After 80 years of forced military silence, Japan is rebuilding the sword it once ruled the Pacific with. And here's what should make everyone pay attention. Japan is not rearming slowly. Japan is rearming like it expects war. For decades after World War II, Article 9 of Japan's constitution banned offensive military force. They could defend, if attacked nothing more. No long-range missiles, no strike capability, no power projection. Japan became the world's great pacifist. But then China rose. North Korea arm-tested missiles over Japanese airspace. Russia moved nuclear submarines in the north. And suddenly, Japan realized something terrifying. Everyone else had taken off the handcuffs. Japan was the only one still wearing them. Now Tokyo is done pretending. Japan approved the largest military expansion since 1945. Defense budget doubled on track to surpass Russia. 500-plus Tomahawk missiles purchased from the U.S. New long-range strike missiles built at home. F-35 stealth fighter fleet becoming the biggest outside America. A new Marine-style amphibious force. Aircraft carriers. Officially returning. Yes, aircraft carriers. Japan now has 2 carriers capable of launching F-35Bs. The same type of fighters designed to fight China. The plan is no longer defense. The plan is deterrence through overwhelming force. Japan's leaders aren't even hiding it anymore. We will strike enemy bases if necessary. That sentence would have been unthinkable 10 years ago. Now it's national policy. The country once symbolized by paper cranes and pacifism is building the most advanced anti-ship missile system in Asia. The nation once lectured about never going to war again is preparing to fight and win the next one. This isn't hype. This isn't theory. This is history waking up a giant. A nation that stayed silent for 80 years is sharpening its sword again. And the question every strategist is now asking, what happens when the warrior culture that created the samurai finally returns to the battlefield? To answer that, we need to understand why Japan fell silent and what unleashed its return. Next, the surrender that didn't kill Japan's warrior identity, it only buried it alive. To understand Japan's rebirth, we must first confront the moment it died. August 1945, Tokyo burned. 2 cities vaporized. The empire shattered in a blinding flash. Japan didn't just lose a war, it lost its identity. For centuries, Japan believed in a sacred truth. To be Japanese is to fight. The samurai culture wasn't mythology. It was the operating system of the nation. Bushido, the way of the warrior, demanded sacrifice, honor, and loyalty to death. That spirit built a navy that ruled the Pacific in 1941. It drove pilots to turn their planes into weapons. It convinced a small island nation that it could defeat the world's strongest superpower. But Hiroshima and Nagasaki erased that belief in a single week. The emperor spoke surrender, for the first time in over 2,000 years, and the warriors laid down their swords. The new Japan was designed to never rise again. The U.S. occupation forced Article 9 into the Constitution. Land, sea, and air forces will never be maintained. Never. Not a misunderstanding. Not temporary. Japan was to be a merchant nation, not a military one. A global factory, not a global force. Its purpose shifted from conquest to commerce. And it worked. Japan became the Hasson electronics superpower, the world's second-largest economy. A technological titan. The warrior faded behind neon lights and bullet trains. The world believed the samurai were gone. But Tokyo always knew the truth. The spirit didn't die. It waited. Japan quietly maintained a powerful self-defense force. Elite pilots, the world's best naval engineers, and intelligence agencies watching every threat on the horizon. They called it defense. But every serious strategist knew Japan had the bones of a military powerhouse, just missing permission to use them. Then the world changed. China started building an empire. North Korea fired missiles over Hokkaido. Russia threatened Japan's northern islands. The handcuffs became a noose. The pacifist constitution became a liability. And an old question returned. A question buried since 1945. If Japan does not defend itself, who will? The answer is becoming clear. No one. That realization did not scare Japan. It awakened Japan. Next, why China's rise, not the past, is forging the new samurai. If Japan's pacifism was built on trust, then China is the threat that shattered that trust. For 30 years, the world told Japan, "Don't worry, America will protect you." Japan believed it. Japan invested in technology and trade instead of tanks. But while Japan built cars, China built a navy. The balance of power reversed overnight. In the year 2000, China was a regional force. Today, the world's largest navy by number of ships, hypersonic missiles designed to sink carriers, the most advanced missile arsenal on Earth, massive cyber, space, and electronic warfare programs, a blue water fleet expanding every year, and Beijing isn't hiding its ambitions. The Pacific has room for only one power, China. Meanwhile, Japan sits just 500 miles away from China's coast. Right next to Taiwan, the spark of the next Great War. The map that terrifies Tokyo. Zoom into East Asia. Japan looks surrounded. To the west, China's military bases in the South China Sea. China's missiles aimed at Japan's ports. China's navy patrolling contested waters. To the north, Russia, still technically at odds with Japan, over island territory. To the west again, North Korea launching missiles directly over Japanese cities. Japan is in the most militarized neighborhood in the world, and every year, China pushes harder. Chinese ships invade Japanese waters weekly. Fighter jets challenge Japan's airspace daily. Beijing declares the Senkaku Islands belong to China. Japan scrambles jets more than 700 times a year. That's twice a day. This isn't intimidation, it's preparation. The coming shock. Taiwan. If China invades Taiwan, Japan is automatically in the war. Why? Because 90% of Japan's energy supplies pass by Taiwan. US bases in Japan would be used immediately. China could surround Japan if Taiwan falls. Tokyo knows, if Taiwan is lost, Japan is next. That's not political rhetoric. That's military math. So Japan changed everything. The old Japan said, "We wait until we are attacked." The new Japan says, "We strike before we are destroyed." China's rise didn't just threaten Japan. It gave Japan permission to become what it always was, a strategic predator forced to act like prey for too long. For 80 years, Japan bought only what it needed for defense. Now it's buying what it needs for victory. The transformation is not subtle. Japan is building a force designed to destroy enemy fleets, strike hostile bases before missiles launch, fight alongside US carrier groups, deny China control of the Western Pacific. This is not a self-defense force anymore. This is a reconnection to a very old identity. The missiles that change everything. Japan is acquiring long-range weapons. For the first time since World War II, 500-plus Tomahawk cruise missiles range up to 1,600 kilometers. Type 1. 2 missiles upgraded to strike mainland China. New hypersonic glide weapons in development. Satellites for real-time targeting. These aren't deterrence tools. They're first strike options. Tokyo now openly states, if an enemy prepares to attack, Japan will strike first. That sentence rewrites 80 years of policy in one breath. The return of aircraft carriers. Japan now operates 2 full-scale carriers. Izumo-class refitted to launch F-35B stealth fighters, equivalent to Britain's frontline carriers. A direct threat to China's navy. Carriers are not defensive assets. They exist for power projection. The last time Japan's carriers sailed into war, Pearl Harbor happened. China has not forgotten. Japan has not forgotten. The best submarines in Asia. Ask any US naval officer which subs they'd want in a war. American or Japanese? Many say, Japanese. Why? Soryu-class AIP subs equals silent killers. Taigei-class gleich next-gen stealth platforms. Perfect for ambushing Chinese fleets near Taiwan. If a war erupts, China's admirals aren't afraid of US carriers. They're afraid of Japanese submarines because they won't know they're there until their ships are already gone. The warriors return. Amphibious forces. Japan formed a new elite unit, the Amphibious Rapid Deployment Brigade. Japan's version of the US Marines. Mission: defend and retake remote islands. Fight inside China's maritime zones. Rapid strike if Taiwan is attacked. They train with American Marines. On-island Zeicher operations. Training for what? Japan won't say. China already knows. The budget of a superpower. Japan's defense spending is exploding. Up 26% in a single year. on track to become the #3 military budget in the world, behind only the US and China. Pacifism doesn't spend billions on hypersonic missiles. Pacifism doesn't build aircraft carriers. Japan isn't pacifist anymore. China forced Japan to wake up. Now Japan is forcing the world to do the same. Because the samurai never truly died. They just stopped wearing armor. Military power alone can't contain China. Japan knows that better than anyone. So while Beijing builds islands and missiles, Tokyo builds alliances, a network of steel that tightens every year. This is the most important shift in the Indo-Pacific. Japan is quietly becoming the center of a coalition built to stop China. The shield of the Pacific, the US-Japan alliance. The US has 50,000 troops stationed in Japan. The 7th Fleet, America's most powerful naval force, is based in Yokosuka, ready to fight in hours. For decades, Japan relied on America. Now the US relies on Japan, because if the Pacific turns red, America loses the century. Washington finally admits it. Japan is indispensable to US power. The Quad. Encircling China with democracies. Japan is the key driver of the Quad. United States, Japan, Australia, India, 4 major powers, 1 strategic purpose. Stop China's expansion. Japan funded ports in India. Australia trains with Japanese jets. India buys Japanese tech to track submarines. The Quad is not a treaty. It's a coalition of fear. Fear of what China is becoming. A new military arc. From Korea to the Philippines. Japan is striking deals never seen before. South Korea cooperation, despite 100 years of mistrust. Philippines-Japanese troops return for the first time since World War II. Vietnam naval cooperation against China's aggression. Taiwan, quiet but undeniable coordination. This is a containment ring, closing around China's coastline. Every choke point covered. Every sea lane watched. Every movement tracked. China may have a bigger navy, but Japan has better friends. The most dangerous reality for Beijing. If China attacks Taiwan, Japan will not stand back. American forces in Japan will launch from Japanese soil. Japan will deploy submarines. Japan will fire missiles. Japan will defend the sea routes it depends on. Beijing knows a war with Taiwan is a war with Japan. A war with Japan is a war with the entire US Pacific Command. A regional conflict becomes a global one in minutes. The silent mastermind. Japan isn't shouting like China. Japan isn't threatening like North Korea. Japan is calmly building a trap. A coalition so strong that China must think twice, and then think again before making its move. Because one mistake could awaken the warrior nation fully. And once the samurai rise, they do not rise halfway. Weapons alone don't make a military powerful. Belief does. What made Imperial Japan terrifying in the early 20th century wasn't just the Yamato battleship or Zero fighters. It was a cultural code. Bushido, the way of the warrior. The world thought Bushido died in 1945. It didn't. It transformed. The warrior became the worker. Japan redirected its warrior spirit into industry, perfection in craftsmanship, discipline in teamwork, loyalty to the mission, no tolerance for failure. Toyota, Sony, Panasonic, Honda, Samurai Disciplina became assembly line precision. The battlefield changed. The identity remained. Japan conquered the world again, this time with silicon instead of steel. A new generation with a sleeping instinct. For decades, young Japanese grew up in peace. No wars, no invasions, no threats. But then, sirens sounded for North Korean missile tests. Chinese ships surrounded disputed islands. Russian bombers circled Hokkaido. And the youth who never cared about security started asking questions. What will protect us? When danger comes here? Public opinion shifted fast. A majority now support a real military. Most agree Japan must defend Taiwan. Many want Article 9 changed permanently. Japan isn't being pushed into militarism. Japan is choosing strength again. The warrior spirit reframed. The old Bushido embraced sacrifice. The new Bushido embraces survival. Old Japan fought for empire. New Japan fights for existence. Old Japan charged forward blindly. New Japan calculates every move. But one thing hasn't changed. Japan will endure anything. except humiliation. The Pacific War taught Japan the cost of pride. China is now teaching Japan the cost of weakness. The samurai never left. Uniforms, ranks, and doctrines can be rewritten. Culture cannot. Japan is a nation that perfected war long before it perfected peace. If conflict returns to Asia, the quiet workers become silent warriors again, and the world may witness a truth forgotten for 80 years. Japan does not lose twice. World War II in the Pacific was a battle of carriers, battleships, and giant armies clashing across island chains. That world is gone. The next war, the one Japan is preparing for, will be decided before soldiers ever see one another. Because today, the most important weapons are invisible. Japan knows this. The first shots will be silent. A modern Pacific war begins with cyber attacks shutting down infrastructure, satellite jamming, blinding missiles and drones, AI-driven weapons identifying targets in seconds, hypersonic strikes arriving before warning sound. No Pearl Harbor. No declaration. Just silence. Then blackout. Japan has invested billions in countermeasures. Quantum encrypted communications. National Cybersecurity Command. A new space operations group. Tracking Chinese satellites. When the sky goes dark, Japan plans to keep fighting. Geography is Japan's advantage and China's nightmare. Look at the map. Japan controls the first island chain, the barrier that traps China's navy inside its own waters. Every strait, every shipping lane, every exit route passes under the sight of Japanese submarines and missile launchers. Japan doesn't need to invade China. Japan just needs to lock the door. If China can't break out, it can't win. Swarm warfare. The new samurai strategy. Japan is building weapons that fight like their ancestors. Small, fast, precise, deadly, autonomous SEA drones, anti-ship missile swarms, stealth submarines in ambush positions, F-35 fighters, hunting from hidden carriers. This isn't brute force. This is asymmetry, the art of defeating giants. The homeland becomes the battlefield. Japan's cities were once safe behind oceans. Not anymore. China's missiles can hit Tokyo in minutes. North Korea's missiles already fly over Japan. Russia threatens Japan's north. So Japan is building hundreds of new shelters, a national missile defense network, rapid civilian evacuation plans, mobile launchers hidden on remote islands. Every inch of Japan can become a firing position. The entire nation becomes a fortress. The real stakes. This isn't simply a battle for islands. This is a battle for the Pacific century. If Japan falls, China controls Asia. If Japan stands, China stalls. The fate of First Island Chain. The fate of Taiwan. The fate of U.S. power. All of it depends on whether Japan's new strategy works. And Japan knows what the world sometimes forgets. The first battle decides the war. So Japan is preparing to win the first minute. There is one event, one flashpoint, that guarantees Japan goes to war. A Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Not maybe, not debate in parliament. Automatic. Because Taiwan isn't just a neighbor. It is Japan's shield. The geography Japan cannot escape. Look at the sea lanes around Japan. 90% of Japan's oil, 60% of its food imports, nearly all of its liquid natural gas. They flow through the waters just east of Taiwan. If China takes Taiwan, China can strangle Japan without firing a shot. Tokyo understands the math. Lose Taiwan, lose Japan. That is why Japanese leaders openly state, Taiwan's defense is Japan's defense. There is no ambiguity. Japan draws its red line in the Taiwan Strait. The bases that force Japan into battle. The U.S. military relies on Japan as its frontline fortress. Kadena Air Base, the largest U.S. air base in Asia. Yokosuka, home of the 7th Fleet. Marine Rapide Deployment units in Okinawa. If China attacks Taiwan, these bases activate instantly. Japan becomes the battlefield whether it chooses or not. Beijing knows this. Tokyo knows, Beijing knows this. There is no escape from the fight. The islands that decide everything. China doesn't start the war by invading Tokyo. It starts by taking the islands in between. Senkaku, Yonaguni, Ishigaki, Miyako. Small, remote, but strategically priceless. Japan has already militarized them. Anti-ship missiles on Ishigaki. Radar tracking China's fleet on Yonaguni. Air defense expanding across the Ryukyus. The line of bases forms a blade pointed straight at China's navy. If war erupts, Japan's first order is simple. Hold the islands. Bleed the invasion. Sink the dragon in shallow waters. China's nightmare. Japan doesn't need to defeat China outright. Japan just needs to delay China long enough for the US to unleash its full arsenal. Every hour China fails to control the seas is a step closer to losing everything, and that is why Beijing fears Tokyo more than Washington. Because Japan is already on the battlefield, Japan has skin in the game. It's survival. The clock is ticking. Pentagon simulations say China invades Taiwan by 2027. Japan enters the war within the first hour. The Pacific becomes the most violent ocean on Earth. Japan no longer asks whether the war will come. Japan asks, will we be ready when it does? When Japan looks to its west, it sees China preparing for war. But when Japan looks north, it sees the bear waiting. And to the northwest, a rogue state firing missiles overhead. The Taiwan War doesn't stay one war. It instantly becomes three. Front one. China takes the first swing. We've already seen the plan. Hit Taiwan. Challenge Japan's southern defenses. Stop US. Reinforcements. But then, Front Russia seizes its opportunity. Russia claims Japan still occupies stolen land, the northern territories in the Kuril Islands. The Kremlin repeats the same mantra. Japan never truly surrendered to Russia. For Moscow, World War II never ended. If Japan is busy fighting China, Russia has every incentive to strike north, seize Japanese islands, expand naval control into the Pacific, force Japan to divide its fleet. And Russia's Pacific Fleet is not symbolic. ICBMs and submarines, long-range bombers, hypersonic anti-ship missiles. One push from China, and Russia joins the shove. Front 3. North Korea lights the fuse. Kim Jong-un does not need to win a war. He just needs to add chaos. Missile barrages on Japan's cities, threats of nuclear attack on Tokyo, forcing Japan to divert air defenses. North Korea has already fired rockets over Japan. They practice for the real thing. In a crisis, Pyongyang attacks not to conquer, but to overwhelm. Japan remembers this pattern. This isn't a new nightmare. 1941 Japan fights America plus Britain plus China plus USSR. Stretched across too many fronts. Ran out of ships. Ran out of fuel. Ran out of time. Japan knows exactly how empires die. Not from one enemy, but from all at once. So Japan is preparing for something no other democracy prepares for. A three-front war. Against three nuclear powers. The greatest fear in Tokyo. It's not losing ships at sea. It's not missiles hitting Tokyo. It's not cyber attacks or blackouts. It's being isolated again. Japan will not stand alone. Japan will drag the world into the fight if it must. Because history taught Tokyo one lesson. If Japan falls, no one comes to save it. For 80 years, Japan fought a war against itself. A war to bury its military identity, to silence its warrior code, to deny its own history. But history has returned. The threats are real. The dangers are close. The enemy has a timeline. Japan can no longer pretend that peace is guaranteed by words written in 1947. So the nation that swore never to fight again is now preparing to win again. The shift that changes everything. Japan's leaders no longer speak in whispers. They speak in warnings. We are entering the most severe security environment since the end of World War II. Japan is rewriting its constitution. Japan is rebuilding its industries for war. Japan is training its youth for a future their parents swore they would never see. Pacifism was a luxury of a safer world. That world is gone. The United States needs Japan. Washington spent decades telling Tokyo, "We protect you." Now America says, "We need you." Japan isn't a junior ally anymore. In the next war, Japan is the decisive ally. If Japan falters, the Pacific falls. If Japan stands, the balance holds. The free world will look to Tokyo before it looks to Washington. The warrior nation returns. Japan's transformation is not aggressive. It is inevitable. A nation surrounded by nuclear powers can no longer rely on hope. A nation guarding the front line of democracy can no longer stay silent. A nation built by warriors can only pretend to be peaceful for so long. The world wanted Japan to forget its power. Japan did not forget. Japan simply waited. Now the waiting is over. The new samurai, not kamikaze pilots, not imperial armies, not conquest, but guardians of the Pacific. The same loyalty, the same discipline, the same fearless resolve, directed toward one purpose: survival. The last time the samurai rose, they tried to rule the world. This time, they intend to save it. The final truth: Japan has no desire for war. Japan has every preparation for war. Because this time, Japan knows exactly what happens if it loses. And the world is about to relearn something it forgot too quickly. A silent Japan is not a weak Japan. It is a Japan preparing. When the samurai fight again, the Pacific changes forever.